They say time heals all wounds. But I've learned that time doesn't really heal it, just buries. And sometimes it doesn't bury deep enough. My name is Margaret. I'm 72 years old. And this is the story of how a Christmas gift from my granddaughter led me to a secret my husband kept hidden for over a decade. A secret that shook the foundation of everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and family. Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're watching this from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. It was Christmas morning, and I was sitting alone in my living room. The fire was crackling, the tree was lit, and the smell of cinnamon from a leftover candle mixed with the scent of old wood and quiet memories. I had my cup of instant coffee, same mug I've used for the last 20 years shipped on the handle, but it fits my hand like it was made for me. Outside, the snow was falling in slow, lazy flakes, the kind you only get in stories. Everything looked peaceful, but inside, I felt like I was waiting for something. I didn't know what. My house used to be full on Christmas. Jack would be in the kitchen pretending to know what he was doing with the turkey. Our sons would be fighting over the remote, and I'd be juggling cinnamon rolls and shouting over the music. Now it's just me. My boys have their own families, their own traditions. They love me, I know they do, but life gets busy. I've learned not to take it personally. Still, when you sit by yourself year after year, you can't help but wonder when exactly you stopped being part of the picture. I had just finished a crossword puzzle and was about to heat up some oatmeal when I noticed something under the tree. A small box I didn't recognize, wrapped in candy cane paper, tied with a red satin ribbon. There was a tag on it, written in loopy teenage handwriting. To Grandma. From Emily. Emily. My sweet granddaughter. 15 years old. Braces. Always doodling in her notebook. I haven't seen her since spring. Her mom, my ex-daughter-in-law, hasn't exactly made visits easy. But here was a gift. From her, no one told me it was coming. I hadn't expected anything. I reached down and picked it up. It was heavier than I thought. Not the weight of a sweater or a candle. It had density. It had presence. I sat back on the couch and just held it for a moment. It felt strange to be holding a present again. Like a part of me had been asleep for years and was slowly starting to stretch awake. I opened it slowly, untying the ribbon with fingers that aren't as quick as they used to be. I peeled back the paper and found a wooden jewelry box inside. Mahogany, worn at the corners, with brass hinges and a soft velvet lining. It wasn't new. It looked like something from an antique shop. Something with a story. The kind of thing I used to collect before downsizing. The lid had a little carved hummingbird on it. Jack used to say I reminded him of one always fluttering around, trying to do 5 things at once. I smiled at the memory, then gently opened the box. Inside, nestled in the velvet, was a folded piece of yellowed paper. It looked old, too old to be from Emily. My chest tightened. I picked it up carefully. My heart skipped a beat. On the outside, in handwriting I hadn't seen in over a decade, were the words, "To Margaret, for when you're ready." I knew that handwriting. I knew it the way you know your own heartbeat. It was Jack's, my husband, gone 11 years now. I stared at it, not breathing, not moving, like the paper might vanish if I blinked. My hands started to shake. I looked around the room, as if someone might be there to explain what was happening. But it was just me, the fire, and this impossible letter. I unfolded it. My eyes scanned the first few lines. And that was the moment everything I thought I knew about my husband, my marriage, and my life began to unravel. The letter was dated December 14th, 2011, 9 days before Jack died. I read the date 3 times, like my brain couldn't register it. That was the winter he collapsed in the garage while getting down the Christmas lights. Heart attack, they said, fast and painless. He was gone before the paramedics even got there. We buried him with the sweater he wore every Christmas morning, the one I hated but he loved. I never knew he'd written me anything. I never found a letter. Not in his study, not in his coat pockets, not tucked into his Bible. But here it was. somehow tucked into a gift from Emily. My hands shook as I began to read. Margaret, it began. If you're reading this, then I've already left, and that breaks my heart more than I can say. I wanted to tell you so much before I went, but I couldn't. You always deserved the truth. And now it's the only thing I have left to give you. There's something I never told you. Something I couldn't tell anyone. But I think you're ready now. I think you need to know. My breath caught. I looked up from the page. The fire crackled. The wind howled against the windows. But inside, the room felt still, heavy. My heart pounded. I had no idea what I was about to read. But I knew, deep in my gut, it was something big. I lowered my eyes back to the letter. I made a mistake when I was a young man. Before we met. A choice I've carried with me every day of our life together. I tried to bury it. I tried to forget. But God has a way of circling things back around, especially when you're not ready. There's a girl. Her name is Rachel. She was born in 1966. She would be 45 now. I think she might be looking for me. Or maybe she's already found you. I don't know how or when this will reach you, but if it has, it means she's closer than I ever thought. I stopped reading. My throat closed. Rachel, born in 1966. That was 4 years before I met Jack. My mind began racing through every memory, every conversation we'd had about his past. He always told me he had a few wild years before settling down, but I never pressed. He wasn't the type to open old wounds, and I never wanted to pry. I trusted him. God, I trusted him. I loved him with everything I had. And now, here I was, finding out about a daughter I never knew existed. Or maybe didn't exist. Maybe this was some kind of joke. Some strange misunderstanding. But Jack wasn't a man who joked about things like this. If he wrote it, he meant it. My fingers tightened around the paper. I kept reading. I left a box in the attic. Inside is everything. Letters, documents, the whole story. I didn't want to die with this on my conscience, Margaret. I don't want you to think less of me. I just didn't know how to tell you. Not after all the years we shared, all the love we built. I was afraid it would tear us apart. But now, I believe you're strong enough. I believe you'll know what to do. I hope Emily never has to carry this burden. I hope she's just the messenger, not the message. I love you. Always. Jack. I sat there for a long time. Long enough that my coffee went cold, and the fire burned down to embers. I read the letter again and again, trying to make the words change, hoping I'd missed something. But the meaning was clear. Jack had a daughter, and she might be looking for us. Or worse, she might already be here. My eyes drifted to the wooden box again. Emily had given it to me with a smile. She had no idea what was inside. Or did she? My heart dropped. There was only one way to find out. I had to open the attic. The attic wasn't just a room in my house. It was a memory trap. Every dusty box, every creaky floorboard, every forgotten suitcase had a story attached to it. I hadn't been up there in years, not since I'd fallen off the second step on Thanksgiving and bruised my hip. But that morning, I didn't feel pain. I didn't feel fear. All I felt was fire. Jack had left something for me up there, something that had waited over a decade to be found. I grabbed the step stool from the laundry room, pulled on my thick cardigan, and climbed the narrow stairs with more strength than I knew I had. The air was cold and sharp, and the moment I pushed open the attic door, I was hit with the scent of cedar, old paper, and 1,000 winters' worth of silence. I stood there for a moment, letting my eyes adjust. Light filtered in from the small round window, casting soft rays across dusty furniture, plastic bins, and boxes labeled in Jack's neat handwriting. Xmas lights, boys' school, vacation 93. I scanned the room slowly, looking for anything that felt different, something out of place, something meant for me. My heart was pounding. I moved past an old trunk filled with Halloween costumes, a box of VHS tapes we never threw out, and a rocking horse Jack once tried to restore. Then, tucked behind an old garment bag and our wedding china, I saw it. A plain cardboard box. No label, no writing, just tape, browned and curling at the edges. I knelt down, the floor creaking beneath me, and pulled it out. It wasn't heavy, but it had that quiet weight, the kind that comes from years of being forgotten on purpose. I sat cross-legged like a child and peeled back the tape. Inside, there was a bundle of letters, tied with twine, a small velvet pouch, a manila envelope, sealed. And on top, resting like a confession, was a photo. I picked it up slowly. It was Jack, maybe 21, maybe younger, shirtless, grinning, his arm around a young woman with long, dark hair and eyes that reminded me of someone I couldn't quite place. She was beautiful. And next to them, in a small stroller, was a baby girl. I stared at the photo until the image blurred. My eyes burned. My hands trembled. I flipped the photo over. Written in faded ink, Rachel Summer, 67. I wasn't breathing. I realized that only when I gasped for air. Rachel. She was real. This wasn't a delusion, not some leftover dream from grief. She was his daughter, and judging by that photo, he had known her, held her, loved her, maybe, long before I ever knew him. Why hadn't he told me? Why had he carried this alone? I opened the envelope. Inside were documents: birth certificate, adoption forms, and something that made my stomach turn. A letter from a private investigator, dated 2008, confirming that Rachel had legally changed her name and was now living in New York, married, one child, no contact with biological parents, no indication she ever tried to reach out to Jack. And yet, here I was, holding this box, reading these files, and my granddaughter Emily had somehow given me the key to it all. How did she get the box? Did Jack give it to someone else before he died? Was it hidden, and she found it by accident? I thought of her sweet face, the way she hugged me tighter than usual the last time I saw her. Had she known something? Or was this fate working in strange, quiet circles? I untied the bundle of letters and pulled the top one free. It was dated 1970, written in Jack's hand. To Rachel. He had written to her. Dozens of times, it seemed. Pages and pages of letters never sent. Apologies, hopes, stories about his life, about me, about our boys. He had tried. Or at least, a part of him had wanted to. Maybe guilt held him back. Maybe fear. Maybe both. I sat there in that cold attic, the letter trembling in my fingers, and realized that I was holding a love story I'd never been part of, and yet somehow, I was the one left to finish it. I didn't know what I was supposed to do next, but one thing was certain: I needed to talk to Emily. I didn't call Emily right away. I couldn't. My thoughts were too scattered, my emotions too raw. I needed to understand what I was feeling before I pulled her into it. The rest of Christmas Day passed like a blur. I didn't eat. I didn't turn on the television. I just sat with that box on my lap, rereading Jack's letter over and over again, like it might rearrange itself and offer a different truth. But the truth was what it was. Jack had a daughter before me. He had loved her, at least, he had tried to, and he had hidden it from me for 40 years. Not out of malice, maybe, but fear, shame, regret. All the things we bury under the surface of a life that looks picture perfect from the outside. I spent that night in my recliner, the box by my feet, the fire long dead. The house was colder than I could remember. At some point, I must have fallen asleep, because I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating on the coffee table. A text from Emily. "Did you like the gift?" My fingers hovered over the screen. I didn't know what to say. Yes, I liked it. No. It shattered my entire sense of history. I didn't want to scare her. Not yet. So I replied, "It was beautiful, honey. Thank you so much. Where did you find it?" She responded almost immediately. "I found it in Dad's garage. I thought it looked like something you'd like. The jewelry box, I mean. There was a letter inside, but I didn't read it. I thought it was private." My blood ran cold. In my son's garage? That didn't make sense. Jack had never brought anything over there. Or so I thought. I typed quickly. "Was it in a bag or just sitting out?" Her answer was slower this time. "It was in a box with old Christmas stuff. I was looking for decorations to help Dad. It had a tag on it with your name. I figured it was something Grandpa had set aside for you. I'm sorry if I wasn't supposed to touch it." No. No, she'd done nothing wrong. If anything, she was the unwitting key to a door that had stayed closed for too long. I told her not to worry, and thanked her again. But now I had a new question. How had the box ended up in my son's garage? Jack must have moved it at some point, or maybe he'd planned for me to find it through them. Maybe he knew I'd never look in our attic again, and the only way this truth would ever surface was if someone else brought it to me. I couldn't get it out of my head. Jack was always 3 steps ahead when it came to emotions. He knew I avoided the attic since my fall. He knew our sons rarely visited me, but that I'd always open a gift from Emily. Maybe this had been his plan all along. Not to hide it forever, but to let me find it on my own terms. Through someone I loved. I walked back to the box and took out one of the letters addressed to Rachel. I read it aloud, softly, like Jack was in the room. "Dear Rachel, I hope you're happy. I hope your life is full of the kind of peace I couldn't give you. I want you to know that I think about you every day, not out of guilt, but out of love. I wanted to be better, but I didn't know how." I stopped reading. My throat burned. This wasn't just a secret. It was a wound he'd carried for a lifetime, and now it was mine too. I looked over at the manila envelope again. The investigator's report had said, Rachel was married, 1 child. No further information. But there was an address listed from 10 years ago, before she'd moved to New York, a suburb only 40 minutes from where I lived now. I suddenly wondered, had I ever crossed paths with her? Passed her at a grocery store, stood behind her at the bank, smiled at her in church? Had she seen me and known who I was? Did she know Jack had died? Did she care? I had 100 questions, and not a single answer. But I knew one thing for sure. I needed to find Rachel. Not for Jack. Not even for her, but for myself. Because if she really was part of Jack's past, then she was part of mine too. And maybe, just maybe, she deserved to know the version of him that I had loved. The one who sat beside me every morning with coffee, who kissed me on the forehead when he thought I was asleep, who built our life with quiet strength and complicated silence. I folded the letter carefully, placed it back into the box, and stood up. My knees cracked in protest, but I didn't care. I had a name, a decade-old address, and a determination that surprised even me. I was going to find her. I was going to look into the eyes of the woman my husband left behind and figure out what came next. I wasn't sure where to begin. 10 years was a long time for someone to stay in one place, especially when they didn't want to be found. But something in my gut told me she hadn't gone far. People don't always run away, they just reposition themselves. I pulled out the old envelope again, the one with the private investigator's report, and reread the details. The name was there, Rachel Henderson. Married name, apparently. She'd lived in a modest, single-story house in a quiet neighborhood just east of town. The report said she had worked at a local florist shop for years. That was my first lead. The next morning, I pulled my old coat from the closet, grabbed my notepad, and headed out. I hadn't driven across town in months, not since my last doctor's appointment. But the streets felt familiar, and the sky had that pale winter glow that always made me think of simpler times. When I reached the address, I parked across the street and just watched for a few minutes. The house lived in fresh wreath on the door, snow shoveled from the walkway, curtains drawn but not in a secretive way. I couldn't tell if she still lived there, but it felt like someone did. I sat in my car debating what to do. I didn't even know what I would say if I knocked. "Hi, I'm the widow of the man who fathered you before I ever knew him. Just thought I'd drop by and hand you a box of letters." It sounded insane. But at the same time, I didn't want to spend the rest of my life wondering. I needed to see her face. I needed to know what Jack had left behind. I stepped out of the car and walked across the street, my boots crunching through leftover snow. As I reached the porch, my fingers started to tremble. I raised my hand to knock, then froze. What if she wasn't home? What if she slammed the door in my face? Or, worse, what if she opened it and I saw Jack's eyes staring back at me? I knocked anyway. 1, 2, 3 soft raps. I waited. No answer. I knocked again. Still nothing. My heart sank. I was about to turn and walk away when I heard the voice behind me. "Can I help you?" I spun around. A woman stood at the end of the walkway, holding a paper bag and a car key. She looked about 50, tall and graceful, with a calm strength in her posture. Her hair was long, streaked with silver, and pulled into a loose braid. She had Jack's nose. And his eyes, my breath caught in my throat. I'm sorry," I stammered. "I didn't mean to intrude, I was looking for Rachel." She narrowed her eyes, cautious but polite. "That's me. Do I know you?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My voice had tangled with my nerves. I took a breath. "My name is Margaret," I said finally. "I was married to Jack Morris." For a moment, her face was unreadable. Then something shifted. A flicker of recognition, a guarded kind of understanding. She stepped closer. "Jack Morris," she repeated slowly. He was my biological father. He died a long time ago." "Yes," I said quietly. "He did. 11 years now." We stood there for a moment, just looking at each other. Strangers connected by blood and secrets. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She just watched me like she was trying to solve a puzzle that had suddenly come to life. "I have something for you," I said, my voice steadier now. "Something he left behind. Something I think you were meant to see." She hesitated, then nodded toward the door. "Come inside." Her living room was warm and smelled faintly of vanilla and pine. A dog barked softly from another room but didn't come out. She gestured for me to sit on the couch while she hung up her coat. I pulled the box from my bag and placed it carefully on the coffee table. She looked at it without touching it. "I found this hidden in my attic," I said. "He left me a letter. Said it was time I knew. That it was time you knew." Rachel sat down slowly. Her hands stayed folded in her lap. She looked older than the picture in Jack's envelope, but still strikingly similar. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were scanning every part of me, as if searching for pieces of him in my face. "Why now?" she asked, almost in a whisper. "Why after all these years?" "Because he didn't know how to say goodbye," I replied. "And maybe neither did I." She didn't cry. I didn't either. We just sat in silence, the box between us, the weight of a lifetime pressing down on both our shoulders. And in that silence, I realized something I hadn't understood until that moment. This wasn't just about Jack. It was about the spaces we leave behind when we go, and the people left to fill them. Rachel didn't open the box right away. She just stared at it, her hands still folded, her back straight, like she was bracing for a storm she'd already weathered once before. I watched her, silently, giving her space. I knew that look. It was the look of someone trying to keep their heart from cracking in public. I'd worn it myself 100 times since Jack passed. "You don't have to read anything now," I offered gently. I wanted you to have it. I didn't feel right keeping it from you. He wrote you letters. Dozens." She didn't look up. "I thought he forgot about me," she said, her voice even but brittle. "I used to think maybe I imagined him. My mother barely spoke about him. All I knew was that his name was Jack. She said he was young, scared, not ready for a baby. She said he left and never came back. I felt a weight drop into my stomach. I'd lived with Jack for over 40 years. Loved him. Trusted him. Built a family and a life beside him. But hearing Rachel speak, I realized just how little I really knew about that part of his past, and how much she'd had to carry on her own. She finally reached forward and touched the box, just a fingertip on the wood. Then, slowly, she opened it. She didn't speak as she lifted the first letter from the stack. Her eyes scanned the page, her mouth barely moving, like she was whispering the words silently to herself. A minute passed, then another. And then she let out the softest sound. Not a cry, exactly, more like a sigh that carried 10 years of questions and no answers. He remembered my birthday, she said, her voice small. He remembered it every year. She looked up at me then, and her eyes were wet. Not from grief exactly, from recognition, from something long buried finally surfacing in daylight. She held up the letter, her fingers trembling. He wrote to me about you, about the boys. He described the way you danced in the kitchen and how you always made cinnamon rolls on Sundays. He said you were the best thing that ever happened to him. I nodded, swallowing hard. He said that to me too, every year on our anniversary. I don't know if I'm angry or relieved, she admitted. I spent so many years pretending I didn't care, telling myself I didn't need to know him. But reading this, it's like meeting a version of him I never knew existed. That version was real, I said. He wasn't perfect. God knows he wasn't. But he loved deeply. He just didn't always know how to show it the right way. She leaned back into the couch, still holding the letter in both hands, like it might disappear if she let go. The sunlight coming through the window hit her face, and for a split second, I saw Jack there, in her eyes, in the way she tilted her head. In the quiet sadness she wore like a coat. Why did he never send them? She asked. Why keep all these letters locked away? I took a long breath. I don't know. Maybe fear. Maybe guilt. Maybe he thought it was too late, or that reaching out would hurt you more than help. He didn't talk much about the past, but I know this: he never forgot you. Not for a second. She looked away, blinking hard. I have a daughter, she said after a moment. She's 20. Her name's Lily. I never told her much about my own father. I didn't have anything good to say. But now, she trailed off. And I understood. This changed things. For her, for me, and maybe even for Lily. The past was no longer a shadow, it had become something we could hold, read, piece together. A map of who we were and where we came from. Would you like to come back to my house? I asked softly. There are more letters, photos. I think there's more you should see. She hesitated. Not out of reluctance, but the way someone hesitates before opening a door they've avoided their whole life. Then she nodded. I'd like that. As we stood up, I felt something shift in the air, not closure. Exactly. But connection. Two women bound by one man's silence, now sharing the weight he left behind. We walked outside together, side by side. And in that moment, I realized that maybe this wasn't the end of a chapter. Maybe it was the beginning of one that had taken too long to start. The drive back to my house was quiet, but it wasn't awkward. Rachel sat in the passenger seat, the box of letters resting gently in her lap, like it was something sacred. She stared out the window most of the way, occasionally brushing a piece of hair behind her ear or adjusting her scarf. I didn't press her with questions. I didn't need to. The air between us was filled with more than enough unspoken understanding. When we pulled into my driveway, I caught her glancing at the house with a strange expression. Not judgment, not even nostalgia, just curiosity, like she was finally seeing the place connected to the man who had hovered at the edges of her life for so long. I opened the door and stepped inside first, letting her follow at her own pace. The warmth of the fire I had restarted earlier wrapped around us instantly. My Christmas decorations were still up, though a little crooked and tired. The stockings on the mantel still hanging, one with Jack's name stitched into the fabric. I watched her eyes scan the room. She paused at the photos on the bookshelf me and Jack at our 40th anniversary party. The boys in their graduation gowns, Emily as a toddler, holding a cookie almost as big as her face. She stepped closer, her fingers almost reaching out, then stopping short. "That's your granddaughter?" she asked quietly, pointing to the photo of Emily. "Yes," I said. "She's the one who gave me the box. Found it in her father's garage, wrapped it for me without knowing what was inside." Rachel nodded slowly. "She looks like him. My father. She's got his eyes." Her words settled in my chest like a stone. I'd never heard anyone refer to Jack as my father, other than our sons. Hearing it from Rachel was jarring. Not in a painful way, but in a way that reminded me this story was bigger than I ever imagined. We weren't just stitching together loose threads. We were discovering an entire section of fabric that had always been missing. I led her into the den, where I had set aside the rest of Jack's things. Another smaller box sat on the table, filled with photos, old letters he'd written to me over the years, and a tape recorder we used during our first road trip. I watched Rachel sit down and reach into the box carefully, reverently. She pulled out a Polaroid Jack in his workshop, sawdust on his shirt. Looking up mid-laugh, she smiled. "He looks happy here." "He was," I said. "He loved working with his hands. Could fix anything but the toaster." She laughed softly. "My mother told me he was clever with machines, that he wanted to build furniture. I used to wonder if he ever did." "He did," I said. "That coffee table in the front room? His hands made every inch of it. Same with the cabinets in the kitchen." She looked down, absorbing that, and for a moment, I could see the child in her little girl who must have wondered if her father ever thought about her, if he had any idea what she liked, who she was becoming. She picked up another letter and unfolded it, scanning the first few lines before stopping and holding it out to me. "This one's about a dream," she said. "A dream he had where he saw me in a garden. Said I was picking flowers and humming. He said he woke up crying." I took the letter carefully, reading the words Jack had written in the early '80s. His handwriting was a little messier then. Emotional. Raw. "I don't know if dreams mean anything," he wrote, "but if they do, I hope that was her telling me she's okay. I hope she knows I think about her. Every day. Every single day." Rachel didn't say anything. She just looked at me with eyes full of something I couldn't name. Not sadness exactly. Not forgiveness either. Something in between. Something that only years of not knowing could create. And then she said, the one thing I never expected. "I want to meet Emily." My heart paused. "You do?" She nodded. "I don't want to sneak around this anymore. She brought this to you. She opened the door even if she didn't mean to. And I feel like maybe she's part of my story too. If she's willing, I want to talk to her." 1,000 thoughts rushed through my mind. What would Emily think? Would she be overwhelmed? Confused? Angry at me for not telling her sooner? Or would she understand that family isn't always neat and symmetrical? That sometimes the people who belong to us don't arrive in tidy packages? I reached for my phone, staring at her contact photo selfie she sent me last summer. Sunglasses too big for her face, tongue sticking out in classic teenage rebellion. I took a deep breath. "Let's call her." My fingers hovered over Emily's name for a long moment before I finally pressed the call button. The line rang twice before she answered, her voice warm and casual like it always was. "Hi, Grandma. Everything okay?" I glanced at Rachel, who gave me a small, supportive nod. "Yes, sweetheart. Everything's okay. I was wondering, are you home right now?" "Yeah. Just got back from the mall with Mom." "Why? Would you mind coming over for a bit? I'd like to talk to you about the gift you gave me." There was a pause on the line. "Did I do something wrong?" "No, not at all. It's just, there's someone here I'd like you to meet." Another pause. Then, "Okay. I'll be there in 20. I hung up and looked at Rachel, my heart thudding in my chest. "She's coming." Rachel smiled softly, but I could see the nerves setting in behind her eyes. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and glanced down at the open box in front of her. Do you think she'll understand? I don't know, I said honestly, but I know she's kind, and she's curious. That's a good place to start. The next 20 minutes felt like hours. Rachel stayed seated, thumbing through another letter, while I tidied up the living room in pointless ways, folding blankets that were already folded, adjusting a picture frame by a millimeter. I caught myself holding my breath every time a car drove by. When I finally heard the knock, my heart practically jumped out of my chest. I opened the door, and there stood Emily, bundled in her winter coat, cheeks pink from the cold, and a puzzled expression on her face. Hey, Grandma, she said, stepping inside. Then she saw Rachel. Her eyes widened, flicking between us. Hi, she said cautiously. Rachel stood slowly. She looked nervous, but composed. Hi, Emily. I'm Rachel. Emily turned to me, eyebrows furrowed. What's going on? I took a deep breath. Come sit down, sweetheart. There's something we need to talk about. We all sat down, me in my usual chair, Rachel on the sofa, and Emily perched on the ottoman like she was ready to run if needed. I reached for her hand, and she let me take it. The jewelry box you gave me, it had something inside it. A letter. From your grandfather. Her eyes flicked to Rachel, then back to me. Grandpa Jack? Yes, I said. He wrote it before he passed. It was hidden in the box, and it led me to her. Rachel gave a soft smile. I'm Jack's daughter, from before he met your grandma. A long time ago. Emily blinked, confused. Wait, so you're, like, my aunt? Rachel laughed gently. Technically, I suppose so. I know it's a lot to process. Emily looked at me. You didn't know? Not until yesterday, I said. He never told me. But he left a trail, and somehow you brought it to me. Emily looked down at the box, the letters inside, and then back at Rachel. So, all of this was in there? And you just found it? It found me, Rachel said. And then I found your grandma. And now, I guess I found you. There was a long pause. Emily stared at her, lips pressed together. Then she asked the one question that seemed to matter most. Why didn't he tell anyone? Rachel and I looked at each other. I answered quietly. Because he didn't know how. He was a good man, but he carried a lot of shame. I think he always meant to tell us, but never found the right time. So he left the truth behind in a way he hoped we'd discover. Emily was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I always knew there was something different about that box. I almost didn't wrap it, you know? I thought it was too old, too plain, but something told me to. I smiled. That something was probably your grandfather, nudging you from wherever he is now. She laughed just a little. He always did like to be dramatic. Rachel looked at her with a warmth I hadn't seen in anyone but Jack himself. You have his wit, she said. And his eyes. Emily gave a shy smile, the weight of the moment still settling on her. Then she turned to me. So, what happens now? I looked at Rachel. She looked at me. And together we said the same thing. We figure it out. As a family. Over the next hour, the three of us stayed in that living room, passing letters, photos, and stories back and forth, like they were fragments of a broken mirror, finally being pieced together. Rachel read through several of the notes Jack had written her over the years, some thoughtful, some rambling, some filled with quiet apologies and wishful dreams. Emily listened with wide, thoughtful eyes. She asked questions, good ones, gentle ones, the kind that showed me she wasn't just curious, she was ready to understand, even if none of this had been in any family tree she'd ever imagined. At one point, Rachel held up a photo of Jack holding our youngest son, David, just a few months old. This must have been around 1982, she said. I think I was 16 then. I was probably sitting in a classroom wondering what he looked like, and he was right here holding someone else. Her voice didn't carry bitterness, just quiet realization. And that hurt in a different way, because the thing about secrets is they don't stay secrets forever. They just find new people to wound. I moved closer to her on the couch and placed a hand over hers. He never stopped loving you, I said. He just didn't know how to be two people at once. A husband, a father to one child, and a ghost to another. Rachel nodded slowly. I get it, I do, but it still hurts. I think it always will. That's okay, I whispered. It means it mattered. Emily reached into the box and pulled out one of the last letters. This one's dated just a few days before he passed, she said. Want me to read it? Rachel looked at her, eyes glistening. Yes. Emily unfolded the page, cleared her throat, and began. Dear Rachel, I don't know if this will ever reach you, but I have to believe it might. You're probably grown now. You probably have a life I was never part of. But I want you to know something. If I could go back and be brave when it mattered most, I would have found you. I would have shown up. I would have fought for a place in your world. You deserved better than silence. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know that I loved you. And that love never left me. When Emily finished, she folded the letter gently and handed it to Rachel, who held it like it was something alive. None of us spoke. There was nothing left to explain. The words had done their job. Jack's voice had crossed time, space, and fear to finally reach his daughter. Rachel stood slowly and walked to the fireplace, gazing at the old stocking that still bore Jack's name. Did he hang this every year? She asked. Every single one, I said. Even after he passed, I couldn't bring myself to take it down. Rachel reached out and lightly touched the edge of the stocking. May I? I nodded. She took it down gently and brought it to the couch. She turned it over and smiled. Still has the safety pin at the top. My mother used to do the same thing, said it was faster than sewing. He said the same, I said, chuckling through the lump in my throat. Funny how some things stay the same, no matter how far apart lives go. Emily leaned forward. Do you have any photos of her? Your mom, I mean? Rachel shook her head. No. She burned most of them after the divorce. Said the past didn't belong in the future. But I kept one. Taped it inside my childhood diary. I haven't looked at it in years. You should, Emily said softly. We could add it to the family album. If you want to. Rachel looked surprised, touched. You'd really want that? Emily smiled. Your family. That's what we do, right? We remember the parts that hurt, and we keep the ones that heal. Tears welled up in my eyes. I hadn't expected this. Not the unity. Not the grace. Not the way 2 generations, shaped by a man who couldn't bring himself to bridge the gap in life, were now doing it for him in death. I felt something shift inside me. Something warm, like forgiveness. Not just for Jack, but for myself too. For all the times I chose not to ask, not to dig, not to open the attic where secrets waited. I thought I was protecting our marriage. But maybe I was just protecting myself from the truth, and maybe that truth, as painful as it was, had brought us all exactly where we needed to be, together. The days that followed were unlike anything I ever expected from the final chapter of my life. Rachel began visiting more often, sometimes just for coffee, sometimes to sit in silence and read her father's letters again. Each time, it felt a little less like we were strangers. She started bringing photo-sure daughter Lily, her wedding, even a picture of her own mother taken when Rachel was a baby. We placed them side by side with ours. It was like stitching 2 separate quilts together, mismatched, uneven, but somehow beautiful. Emily, bless her heart, embraced it all like she was born for this kind of healing. She took to calling Rachel Aunt Rachel, with a grin that felt as natural as the snow falling outside our windows. One afternoon, I caught them baking together, Rachel in my apron, Emily teaching her how to braid pie crust like I used to. And in that quiet moment, I saw what Jack must have dreamed of in those unsent letters. A daughter connected, a granddaughter laughing, a life that somehow found its way back to wholeness without his hand guiding it. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't something loud. It's not always a tearful reunion or a dramatic apology. Sometimes it's just a shared recipe, a letter passed between hands, a new photo on a dusty shelf. Sometimes it's sitting across from the person you thought you'd never meet and realizing they were never lost, they were simply waiting. On Christmas Day, 1 year after the box arrived, we lit a candle for Jack. Not to mourn him, not to forgive him, but to thank him for trying, for reaching across time the only way he knew how, for trusting that love, even buried under guilt and silence, could still find its way to the surface. We placed the candle next to the old jewelry box, the one Emily wrapped with red ribbon, not knowing it held a legacy. That night, as I watched the flame flicker against the window, I felt peace. The kind of peace that comes not from forgetting, but from finally understanding. Life is full of unfinished stories, but some of them don't need to end to be complete. Let me know in the comments what you thought of my story. And if you haven't already, please like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. And if you've ever had someone reappear from the past in a way you didn't expect, I'd love to hear your story too.